Whether you're joining one of our events for the first time or if you're a seasoned regular, welcome to the Customer Marketing Summit. We have an incredible selection of innovative content lined up for you today. But before we dive in, I just wanted to say a huge thank you to our sponsors, speakers, and you, our lovely audience, for joining us. From wherever in the world you are watching, we're sure you'll enjoy today's talks. To get the most out of these sessions, please make sure you're sharing your feedback and asking your questions in the comments section for our speakers to answer. Each of today's session recordings will be uploaded into our on-demand content library, which you can access with a PMA Pro membership or an Access All Areas pass. We are also really excited to announce that the Customer Marketing Alliance is becoming its very own community. We'll have more information to follow soon, but for now, you can join us in the Customer Marketing Slack channel to connect with peers, get access to fresh content, and discover new opportunities. So with all this to look forward to, let's get started.
Advocacy is a journey that starts with engagement and requires meaningful communication with customers and constant feedback. Let's dig into that and flywheels in this next session.
Hi folks, how's it going? My name is Patrick Cayley and I'm a customer marketer based in Washington, D.C. Previously at a company called Quorum, which made software for public affairs. I'm really excited for my next job, which this session is being recorded a couple weeks early, so I technically haven't started that new job yet. So I don't get to say the name of it just yet. But ever since I started customer marketing about 2.5 years ago, I've been talking to as many other customer marketing managers as possible. And so one, don't recommend reach out to me on LinkedIn. I'd love to chat with you as well. But as we kept having these like roundtable conversations and one-on-one conversations, we would talk about the best ways to run a singular campaign. Like, how do I get the most G2 reviews? How do I get the most referrals and references? And it felt like every time I was having these conversations, it was in a vacuum. And so a friend of mine recommended this book called Good to Great by Jim Collins, where he introduces this concept called the flywheel effect. The flywheel effect essentially means no matter how dramatic the end result, the best programs and things that you put together never happen in one fell swoop, meaning, it's not like one big campaign that you run that ends up creating an excellent customer marketing program. It's these small wins that accumulate over time, creating momentum. And so you can think about it using this example that Jim Collins gives of a flywheel. Now imagine that it's your job to move this like massive metal disc. It's like 30 feet tall and like 2 tons, all right? And so you're trying to spin this disc with your hands. And so you yank it once and it moves like 1 or 2 inches and then 3 or 4 inches and 4 or 5 inches. And you do that enough times that you finally get one full rotation. But as you keep pulling in one direction over and over again, after a while, the wheel starts to turn a little bit faster and a little bit faster, and the momentum ends up building until you get to this point where the wheel's pretty much moving on its own, right? So you barely even have to push it, and it keeps going down or keep going around because of all the momentum and inertia that you've built. And that's called the flywheel effect, is that effect once it starts really moving on its own. So he then paused at this point, which is people would then ask, so what was the one big push that caused this thing to go so fast? And it's like, what? What do you mean? What was the one push that made this go so fast? It was the hours that I spent, at the very beginning when it moved 1, 2, 3, 4 inches. It wasn't just one big push, it's all these steady small wins accumulated over time. And so you might be like, okay, that's a great wheel story, Patrick. We're here to talk about customer marketing. But oftentimes, we hear things like, how did you get so many customers to speak at your events? How did you get so many positive G2 reviews? And these campaigns didn't happen in isolation. It took those many times pulling that wheel that only got it moving 1 or 2 inches to end up getting to the point where we got to that flywheel effect, where we were then able to get a lot of speakers to speak at our events and customers to speak at our events. And so Jim Collins identifies a few different ways on how you can create the flywheel effect that are pretty universal. And I want to apply those to the customer marketing fields with the things that I've done and the things that, as I've talked to a lot of other customer marketing managers, what are the things that they've done in order to achieve the flywheel effect? All right, sound good? All right, so here are the three big things that he mentions. These are your three big tasks. One is to reduce friction. Make it as easy as possible and as seamless as possible for folks to participate in your programs. Two is make the next step obvious. So after they've participated in one program, make the next step obvious so you can then build on the momentum you've gained from then participating in that one program. And then three, continuously apply pressure. It's not one big swoop that makes that wheel turn so fast. It's all of these pushes over time. So the first one we're going to talk about is reducing friction. Here are the three big things that I've pointed out, how I reduce friction for folks to participate in each of my campaigns. One is I've tried to limit as many situations where we need like one-on-one attention. I've talked to a bunch of customer marketing managers that talk about how every time they do like a webinar or every time they do a campaign, they have somebody like put together a quote. They have a one-on-one meeting with the customer where they go through like this questionnaire during the meeting. And oftentimes you don't really need that meeting. That could just be like a form fill for someone to sign really quick. Think about all the barriers that go into setting up a meeting. Even though we have all these cool integrations like Calendly and Chili Piper that help you automate the scheduling the meeting. But then you have to, go through the act of having them actually click that link, going through all the email correspondence of setting up the time. Then you have to wait a week or so to actually get that meeting. And by that time, there's something else that already came up, blah, 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 blah. So oftentimes I've had a lot of success by just trying to take what used to be a meeting where I just go through a questionnaire, turn that into a form, try to make that form sound as personable and fun as possible. And so instead of just, a 2-week-long process of scheduling this meeting and going through that meeting, you just have all the data right there, right away. And it didn't even really require you to do much. There was a great blog from Atlassian where they talked about the flywheel effect, where they said refer to human interaction as a bug. Means that there's something that went wrong along the way is whenever you have to have that one-on-one call with the customer. Well, I wouldn't go that far. I would definitely think about it as, let's make sure that our one-on-one conversations are as meaningful as possible. So if our one-on-one conversations are just going through a questionnaire, maybe that's actually not that helpful for us. Rather, you want to build those personal connections with them. Two is using data you already have and make assumptions off of it. One thing I kept hearing from a bunch of customer marketing managers was they had a tough time getting people to participate in G2 reviews. And the reason for this was because they would reach out to their customers and say, hey, would you be willing to participate in a G2 review? And then only like 3 or 4 would respond. And then they would send them the G2, campaign link. So then they would fill it out. They would only get 1 or 2 people to participate on this thing that took them forever to, build their list of ideal customers, so on and so forth. And so you have a lot of data to your disposal, whether that's, usage data, whether that's, account attributes, and all this other stuff that you're pulling in, like roundtable conversations. You can use that data that you've gathered to make some big assumptions. And I'll talk to you a little bit more about the assumptions that I've put together. And then lastly is creating FAQs for your team, especially for folks like customer success managers and your support team. I'm going to go through the assumptions that I've made that have really paid off for me. One is assuming that customers who speak up at roundtables want to share their story. So if you're hosting a roundtable where folks are sharing their ideas, the folks that are really excited to raise their hand, those are likely folks who really want to participate in case studies, in other webinars, who, one, they might just like to talk and have their voice heard, which I realize is kind of ironic considering that That's kind of why I'm, doing this video right now. So it's definitely not a moral thing. It's an exciting thing that these are people who are excited to talk, like me. So two is that people who read all the way to the end of a newsletter are more likely to be promoters. Back to a G2 example. Oftentimes when we were putting together G2 reviews, we just did folks who submitted positive NPS scores or folks who just had an incredible experience with us. And so oftentimes you're really afraid to just give the link to everyone in case there's a few, folks who are really dissatisfied with your product and are willing to give a negative G2 review out of spite. And what we found was that the folks who go all the way and read all the way to the end of a newsletter are usually our promoters, are the folks who are so excited to see all the things that we have in store for them, whether that's, roundtables or product updates, that they would take the time to read through that whole newsletter. And so when we plugged the G2 review campaign at the bottom of that newsletter, we only got big promoters who were willing to, give those reviews. And so that was our primary way of getting G2 reviews, was by plugging it at the end of that newsletter. We didn't get a single negative review out of that. And then lastly, clients that offer to serve as references are also willing to serve as G2 reviews. So rather than, like I said, using that example before where you would reach out to all your customers and ask, hey, would you be willing to do XYZ? We were able to use a lot of the data based on roundtables and all this sort in order to find folks who'd be willing to participate. This is one of my favorite examples. We had a customer who gave us, I think it was like a 7 NPS score, and then participated in a roundtable later on. And so they had been a customer for like a year and a half. They had given presentations for even our competitors, or they've participated in those webinars. But we never thought to ask because of that passive NPS score. And so after a roundtable, she ended up having some amazing things to say that had our whole audience glued to the screen. Our chat was blowing up. And so at the end, I asked hey, would you be willing to participate in a case study conversation or participate in our upcoming event? And she said, yeah, thank you finally for asking me to speak at your events. I don't know why anybody has asked me or hasn't asked me to speak yet. I've done it for your competitors. I'd be more than happy to speak at your events. And it was because of that passive NPS score that we kind of overlooked her. But in that roundtable conversation that we had, we were able to, identify her as a great speaker. So that's a great way that we used data to make assumptions and all of our experiences to make assumptions on whether or not they'd be interested in participating in other customer advocacy asks. Another great example is with that FAQ doc. This came from a customer success manager on our team. After I wrote this very robust FAQ doc on our upcoming user summit, they said, my customer wanted to do a webinar with us. And rather than having to set up a one-on-one meeting that would have taken us a long time in order to find the availabilities for both of us and the customer, I was able to just copy and paste instructions rather than having to set up a call. So having that FAQ doc ready for our customer success managers and our relationship managers to reference on the call was an absolute game changer. Great. So the next thing you have to do is make the next step obvious. I think we're all aware on how to make a big snowball, right? You start with a small snowball and then you roll it on the ground where it builds upon itself until it becomes a big snowball, which, by the way, this is one of my favorite stock photo images. I don't know how this guy got roped into building a big snowball in his suit, but this is kind of what we want to do with each of our campaigns, right? Is we want the success of one campaign to build upon itself so the next campaign is even better. And so this is how I make the next steps obvious in order to get that. First is whenever I'm planning a new campaign, I like to draw connection points to other programs. For example, if I'm putting together a new retention campaign or an expansion campaign, I like to draw the lines to where that meets with community, where that meets with training, and where that connects with client advisory boards, things like that. So everything is really cohesive and works together and builds upon one another. Number two is striking while the iron's hot. As soon as somebody participates in one campaign, they've already built up that inertia and built up that momentum. So they're likely more willing to participate in the next thing, as long as you follow number 3, which is you make it really easy and simple and straightforward to do so. And so this is what I do, to help guide to the next step, or ways that I've done this. First is whenever my clients have some kind of form, whether that's registering for a roundtable, an event, a webinar, in the post-completion email or in the follow-up right after they submit the forms, I usually push to some kind of other thing, whether that's our user community or a G2 campaign, or to write a review of Quorum or tell us what they think. That happens directly after they sign up for something. Number 2 is whenever I'm doing a webinar or a roundtable, I usually like to mention things like, hey, if you really like this, reach out to your customer success manager to give them your feedback. Or if there's something else you would like to see, let them know. Number 3 is getting reference asks, product feedback, G2 reviews right after an NPS score. So that's something I see a lot of folks doing, is that if you get a positive NPS, then it pushes you over to G2 and other asks. And lastly, you can ask for volunteers during a successful event or right after a successful event. So I'll show you a few examples of how I've done this. This is the slide I like to put up before any of my events. So if I'm doing like a webinar, those first 1 to 5 minutes of a webinar where it's kind of awkward, you're just waiting for folks to join in. And so you're just like, all right, let's wait for folks to join. And you're just kind of smiling at the camera, or you have your camera off. This is when I put up this screen where it says, before we get started, join our user community, where I will also post, the wrap up. So I've gotten a lot of folks to join our community just with this screen here. Additionally, in our follow-up emails and at the end of each webinar, I've had a lot of success with this scripting. Where it was like, thank you for attending our webinar on XYZ topic. Also, if you're interested in speaking and sharing your experience and expertise on a topic or something similar, let me know using the form below. And that's usually when I, post the form in the chat, or I put it in, the email follow-up. And we get a lot of folks submitting their ideas for webinars, roundtables, case studies, stuff like that. We've had a lot of success with that because we've struck while the iron's hot. We thought about this ahead of time when planning this webinar and content. And lastly, just with each of these forms, we make it extremely easy for people to participate. So that's one great way that we've made the next step super obvious for folks. All right, the last thing to note is continuously applying pressure. Even once that thing starts moving on its own, it's great to continuously apply pressure steadily so folks are consistently engaged. This isn't something where you set it up, do a launch email, and then folks just go to it every week or so. Is you have to be continually doing things that apply pressure for folks to come participate in your campaigns. I do that through creating reoccurring touch points and events, making sure that I'm diversifying my channels, especially outside of email. And then lastly, is a lot of success with getting team member buy-in and support. So especially folks on my customer success team, having them contribute here as well. So here are a few of the reoccurring touch points that I absolutely love. One is email newsletters that catalog all of your upcoming webinars, roundtables, events, product updates, product tips, and ways for them to get involved, like how I mentioned earlier with G2 reviews. It's something that our customers regularly look forward to. And so it's another way to, recurringly put pressure on each of these campaigns. Like I mentioned before, these webinars, roundtables, and events are a great way to, plug each of your campaigns and have things build upon one another. User communities and field marketing. If you have a pre-existing community up, that's great. That's another great way to plug each of your campaigns. But also think about the events that are going on around in your industry, whether that's like different association events, conferences, things like that. Figuring out ways that if you have sponsorship of those events, how you can plug in your customer marketing to delight your customers who are there and use their voice at each of these events to propel your program. And then lastly, surveys, polls, and quizzes. If you have a very active user base that wants to be actively involved in your product decisions, in the way that you view the market, they love participating in things like surveys, polls, and quizzes. So these are things that you can set up on a recurring basis that folks actively look forward to. There are two last points that I really wanted to harp on here. And one thing is, what percentage of your client interaction is through email? In order to do this successfully, you can't just have like an email a day coming from your customer success manager asking for each of these things, right? You have to diversify your asks outside of email so you don't overload your clients with email. And also, you're reaching folks who don't actively open your emails, which leads me to something I recommend for every team that I talk to, which is figure out what percentage of your clients haven't opened a single email. If you're likely going to be surprised by the number of clients that just haven't engaged with anything you've done via email. When you think about your customer marketing program, there's a solid chance that almost everything you're doing is through email. And so this is a big group of customers that you've just lost out of the gate because you haven't diversified your channels. And so that's why I always recommend that folks think about things like events, sponsorships, ads like LinkedIn ads or Facebook ads, things like that that'll bring folks in that are outside of email for the folks who are not opening your emails for whatever reason. There's a lot of folks who might actually be engaged with the things you have to say, but they get hundreds of emails a day, so they're not going to open up a random like person@product.org. Figure out ways that you can actively engage them outside of email, whether that's in product or one of the best tools that you have to your disposal likely is especially your customer success managers. This is why it's really important for you to get their buy-in. One is that they likely have the best relationship with their customers, so they can make more targeted appeals and requests. So rather than saying, hey, would you be interested in participating in XYZ activity? You can say, hey, I know you do XYZ and you're really good at that. And so I would love for you to participate in this. And so getting your customer success managers to be able to make that ask and bought into the mission of your customer marketing team is extremely important. And then lastly, they can raise red flags when things aren't working. We've had numerous campaigns that we've run that frankly just didn't work at all. And so they've heard some negative feedback from their customers. Or their customers just weren't aware of the campaigns we were running at all. And we wouldn't have known about that without creating a great relationship with customer success managers. So think about your CSMs and those relationship owners as their own channel, not just something that you kind of have to go through. In order to do that, I recommend you create stellar FAQ documents. I put together Loom videos for all of my CSMs saying like, hey, this is what you need to know about this campaign. That way they hear it in my voice, they see my face when I put it together. And for folks who don't want to read through a 3-page FAQ document, they can listen to this video or watch this video. All right, great. Well, thank you so much for coming to this talk. I would love to connect with you on LinkedIn if at all possible. So reach out to me on LinkedIn. I'll be in the comments section down below, or I think it's down below. Maybe it's over here. Wherever it is, you'll probably see me. I'd love to connect and get a chance to talk about customer marketing. And also, again, lastly, the book is called Good to Great by Jim Collins. I 100% recommend that every customer marketer read it. Hope you have a great rest of your event.